Welcome to the Smart Business Revolution.
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 You want a revolution?
You say you want a revolution?
Revolution. The revolution.
It's going on right now.
Welcome to The Revolution, the Smart Business Revolution podcast, where we ask today's most successful entrepreneurs to share the tools and strategies they use to build relationships and connections to grow their revenue. Now, your host for The Revolution, John Corcoran.
All right, welcome everyone. John Corcoran here, the co-host of this show. Check out some of the past episodes we've had if you are new to this episode or if you're new to this show, because we've had some great interviews with smart CEOs, founders, and entrepreneurs of companies ranging from Netflix to Kinko's, YPO, EO, Activation Blizzard, LendingTree, OpenTable, and many more. And I'm also the co-founder of Rise 25, where we help connect B2B business owners to their ideal prospects. And this is a special episode here because we've got one of our favorite clients that we love working with. Her name is Adi Klevit. She's the founder of Business Success Consulting Group. And she also is the host of the Systems Simplified Podcast, which we've been privileged to help her to launch and to run for quite a while now. And we're going to get into talking about that background and talking about how she's been leveraging that podcast to expand her reach and connect with new people and build a community. And of course, this episode is brought to you by Rise 25, where we help B2B businesses to get clients, referrals, and strategic partnerships with done-for-you podcasts and content marketing. You can go to our website at rise25media.com to learn all about it. All right, Adi, such a pleasure to have you here today. And we're going to do kind of a deep dive into your experience before you had the podcast, why you decided to launch the podcast, some of the strategies that you've implemented. You've been truly amazing. It's been amazing to watch as you have built this and connected with so many different clients and referral partners and strategic partners. But first, before we get into that, tell us a little bit about what you do, because I also have to point out that I've introduced you to probably maybe a half dozen people or something like that. And I think every single one that I've introduced you to has hired you, which is phenomenal. So tell everyone what you do.
Okay. Well, first of all, John, thank you for having me. And I'm so excited to talk about my podcast because I love my podcast and I love working with Rise 25. So it's definitely a privilege. So in terms of what I do, we work with fast growing companies lacking consistency and systems. And we basically create, document, and implement processes and procedures for them. So think about it like your playbook on how to run your company. That's what we create, just like you in a done-for-you fashion for busy entrepreneurs that are growing or scaling or maybe looking at selling the company. Maybe they had an employee there that has been there for a very long time and we need to capture that knowledge. Perhaps they are hiring and they need to train and onboard. So there are definitely many whys, why document, why create processes and procedures. And that's what we do.
Yeah. And it's such a big pain point for so many business owners. I mean, almost every business owner is challenged by this. Tell us a little bit about kind of what your secret sauce is. How do you get people to take it seriously and capture this knowledge and put it into a process?
Well, the secret sauce is really the done it for you approach, right? Because why, like, let's say we have listeners right now, they go, yeah, first of all, decide, you have to figure out if you need systems, right, in your business, if you want it. If you really truly want to grow and scale, I would assume the answer is yes. Have you done it yourself? If the answer is no, why not? Usually lack of knowledge or lack of time, right? So the secret sauce is really to find time despite all the busyness and all the other activities. And we do it by making it very simple. We basically sit down and interview the stakeholders. We ask questions, we know exactly what questions to ask in order to extract that knowledge. And then we have a team that basically processes the entire information and writes it in such a way that is very easy to assimilate, very easy to understand. So we have the know-how on how to do it. So all the business owners and the rest of the stakeholders or the rest of the leadership team has to do is basically just talk about and answer our questions, and we'll take it and we'll put it together so it's in a way that can actually be implemented, and then we coach on the implementation.
And just to give us kind of context, tell us a little about the types of clients that you work with.
So that will be privately held companies that are growing and scaling. So they will have probably, they're past this startup point, because unless a startup, of course, we can work with a startup, but if they are funded and that's something they want to do in terms of having processes. But usually when you start a business, you're not thinking about your processes. You have processes. We all do. When we wake up in the morning and we make coffee or tea or whatever, you have a process on how to do it. Do you need to document it? Probably not. So you get to a point where you have enough leads, enough business coming in, enough clients, enough patients, depending on your business. At that point, in order for you to service all the leads that are coming in, and in order for you to be able to scale, meaning open more locations, hire more people, maybe not work that many hours as you're working, you need organization. And that's the point where we come into play, and we help businesses of any kind. We work across different industries because a process is a process.
And your degree is actually in industrial engineering. So you're actually an engineer. So you bring that kind of engineering approach to it.
That's true. Yeah. So that's the organization, the methodical thinking, etc. Yeah.
Yeah. Tell me about when you started thinking about starting a podcast. What got you started to think about it?
Okay. So I guess like a lot of us, many of us, the pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic, hopefully there is not another one, so I don't have to specify, but it was it was probably April 2020, and I was taking a walk. That was one of the things, all of a sudden, we're all at home, definitely a lot more Zoom calls, meeting people over Zoom. I was, before that, I was networking. In-person networking events, that was my main source of leads.
So like Chamber of Commerce type of things, networking events are where most of your clients came from?
Yeah, I was part of Vistage. So I had my Vistage group, but we will meet in person, and, BNI, but we will meet in person, and specific trusted advisors that we refer back and forth. And I had a really well-established network, and then COVID hit, and I still stayed in touch, but it's different, right? So now we're going on Zoom. And one of my strategies for the year in 2020 was to be on other people's podcasts, because I also do a lot of speaking engagements, again, in person. And that was part of my strategies, to do more speaking engagements. I love educating. I love sharing the knowledge. And I thought, okay, and that was part of my strategy. And of course, that went away. So I started doing webinars, and I had really good attendance, and I had good, definitely that was a source of leads, but like everything else that happened during that time, we tried different things, right? I'm not the only one. I know many of us tried many things, different things. Some of them were working, but they were working also for a short amount of time because it was new, right? So the beginning of the pandemic, people really wanted to be on those webinars. They were like, wanted to be on everything that they can actually get data or be alive or meet others. But then as it became more and more like, okay, this is not going to go away in 2-3 months, we start adjusting to how we operate. Also the numbers of attendees to the webinars went down. It wasn't like, what you advertised in April of 2020 didn't have the same effect in July, August of 2020.
Yeah.
So then I was a guest on other people's podcasts, and I actually met Jeremy through Sweet Process, which is one of the platforms that I use for documentation of processes. So I know Owen.
We use as well. Yeah. And then we help them with their podcast. We actually started helping them with their podcast first and then implemented the software later. And it's amazing software.
Amazing software. And big shout out to Owen. Great guy. I met Owen in 2016. And basically, Owen had me on the podcast with Jeremy recording a case study with one of my clients. So that's, that was my first time meeting Jeremy. And usually when I was on a podcast, the person that was interviewing me was the host, was also the business owner or the owner. I mean, there was like more of a connection, but here it was, I never met Jeremy. Right. And then we recorded a podcast, and I started asking Jeremy questions about what are you doing? And he goes, well, we are producing this podcast. I'm also the host, and I'm creating the podcast. And I love this interview style and how he interviewed me and how interested he was. So anyway, going back to my story. So it was April 2020. I think that podcast we recorded before pre-pandemic. It was probably, I don't know, we'll have to ask Jeremy, but it was before that. So then I was remember taking a walk and thinking to myself, wait a second. I'm a guest. Like what I'm trying to do is being a guest on as many podcasts as I can. How about if I have my own podcast, my own show?
Mm-hmm.
And then guess what? Immediately, what happens when we come up with bright ideas? I don't know. Maybe I'm the only one, but I don't think so. Like what happened when we have like this huge bright idea? What happens immediately?
No, we don't do anything about it, right?
Yeah, we don't. Oh no, how am I gonna do a podcast? But it's so complicated. How can I do it? How can I this? How can I that? Right? No. And I said, no. This is a good idea. I think I should like learn more about that, right?
Yeah.
Maybe I'm having my details here a little bit confused, but maybe I met Jeremy just after that. But anyway, I remember very vividly, it was spring, taking a walk, thinking about it. And then a few days later, I reached out to Jeremy and I said, you know what, Jeremy, let's take a look at that blueprint that you offered, like, which is basically helping me identify my ideal listeners and who should I reach out to and how do I do that? So then I reached out to Jeremy and we scheduled our first call. And meeting, first I met Jeremy, then I met you. So I'm going to talk about both of you together. I mean, you've been so instrumental in directing me and giving me a very easy process to follow and show me how simple it is to actually have your own podcast. And that is where I realized that it's not that hard. All I need to do is just talk to people, which I love talking to people, and hit record and send you the link, and then you do everything else. So for me, that was such a relief because, where am I going to find the people? How am I going to produce it? How is it going to go out there? I didn't have a clue and I didn't want to learn about it. Yes. Can I? Probably yes. But I'm a big believer in delegation and letting people wear their hats and what they're good at and help me achieve my own goals. Right. So that's how it started.
Now, before you even launched the podcast, one objection that we hear a lot is people saying, well, I can't get people to be a guest on my show until I have a track record or I can prove that I have a certain number of downloads or something like that. How do you think about that now, having launched and everything?
Yeah, I mean, the first doubts that I had was, how am I going to find guests? And how I'm going to get guests to agree to be on my podcast, and and is it going to be successful, right? What am I going to ask them? I mean, So then I, with the help of Jeremy, he came up. The thing is that when you do the blueprint, you have a plan on what to do, and you also then get a support from your staff. Like I was working with Joanna. That am I pronouncing her name correctly? Yes,
Johanna. Yeah.
Johanna, that's right.
Yeah.
So I was working with Johanna, who basically was a coach that she helped me figure out, like who are going to be the guests. So you don't just let me go by myself. You really have accountability sessions at the beginning to make sure that I can find the people to interview. But to that objection, I mean, it's like anything else. When you start something, you have your doubts, you have your reservations on how am I going to do that. But if you join something or you do something that is already successful, then you really have to trust the process and know that if others can do it, you can do it as well, right? So long as you know how to talk, so long as you have some kind of a network, right? You're not just living a secluded life with not knowing even one person, you will find who to interview,
Mm-hmm.
You always will find that person because I already had a network and it was very easy. So I basically asked my basically my best referral partners or best center of influence, to be guests on my podcast.
And how did you address it if you hadn't launched yet, or even in the early days after you had launched it?
And nobody ever asked me. It never came up, ever. Never came up. It's it's like anything else. Like what happened when you first start your business? Are you going to say something? Can you be my customer? You're going to be the first one. You just have to go there with certainty and say, hey, would you like to be a guest on my podcast?
Yeah.
You don't have to give a history of how many episodes and how many downloads and how many this and how many that. And it's like what you are giving to that person. That's what's important, right? You are giving them publicity. You are giving them exposure. You are giving them an ability to shine and show what they do. Now, I didn't start from nothing. I have followers on social media. I have a marketing person that, I have a blog, I have a newsletter. So it went on the newsletter, It went on my social media, but the majority of entrepreneurs, they don't start from nothing. I mean, we all have some kind of a presence.
Right.
And
and talk a little bit about how it's helped with content creation, because, a lot of our clients are kind of kicking themselves because they know they should be creating content, but they're not. And then once they start doing the podcast, then it becomes an easier way of actually generating content on a regular basis, which of course Google loves, and it's, makes you top of mind, gives you content to put on a newsletter and on social channels. So talk a little bit about that.
Sure. So, my podcast is the Systems Simplified Podcast. So we talk about systems. So every guest that I have, no matter what, like recently I had a fashion designer that now she's a stylist and help people dress and find their style, etc. We talked about the process of getting ready for a business trip in terms of your wardrobe, or a process of how to choose your image in order to choose the wardrobe so it can help your image. So that gave me a content to write a blog about that process, right? Another example, I interviewed the CEO of Ruby Receptionist, Ruby.com, Kate Winkler. She was amazing. And I didn't plan that conversation, but that conversation was completely about how to manage a remote team, because all of her team is remote. And she gave such great content and such amazing insights about how to manage successfully the team, how to successfully manage a remote team, that then I was able to write a blog based on that conversation, right? Instead of me sitting there and trying to figure out, what are the best words to use to explain how to run a team remotely. All I needed to do is basically take that interview and write a process. I had another guest, Kirsten Melangelo, and she talked about the Eisenhower matrix as an example. Great. She's a great executive coach, very eloquent. It was a great interview. I was able to write a blog based on that, right? I can give you examples after examples of people that I interview. And because I ask the questions that direct them to talk about processes and procedures, everything that we talk about, I can write in a blog about it. Mm. And not only that, I also do thought leadership episodes. So I have Jeremy or you interview me about what I do, about my process, about my business, about, case studies, whatever it is. And that's content by itself that is so valuable. As an example, we just recorded an episode that talks about my proven process. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So now when I'm talking to a prospective client, I send them that episode. So instead of me explaining over and over what my proven process is, I can basically send them my proven process, which is that episode. And instead of preparing and having to, make the perfect video. Yes, I'm a perfectionist. Would I love a perfect video? Absolutely. With the right lights and with the right studio. Is it going to happen? No. So it's better to have, I learned that it's better to have something than nothing. And it's a very high quality something, right?
Yeah.
But it's something I can start using right away. And that is something I really appreciate about you and Jeremy, is that you just push me to do things without having to wait for the perfect opportunity to present itself that will never present itself, right?
Right. Just get it done. And how has it been for, getting more clients, either from the guests or guests to refer you, others who then become clients?
It's been great. I mean, since my first podcast, I'll tell you a story how the first podcast, it is a system that you talk about, and it totally works because I went to my network, my closest friends, my closest referral partners, and I asked one of them, I told her what I'm doing. And I said, she was at the time a rep of a business magazine. And I told her what I was doing. And I said, I would like to interview business owners that have systems that are very well organized, that can share their experience. And she connected me to the marketing director of a company that have amazing business, amazing culture, and amazing systems. And she was actually my first guest. And we hit it off really well, and it was fantastic. And then she had a project. A few months later, she had a project and she brought me on, right? So that's an example, because you connect with people. I had numerous examples of guests that go, wait a second, what do you do? Tell me more about what you do. I want to learn more, that either became clients themselves or connected me with somebody that then became a client. There are so many opportunities, if you know how to network, which is basically give value to others and connect others. So I got that for myself, but I also connected my guests with others that can help them, right? So it's like basically creating that networking activity without having to belong to a specific networking group, because networking is all about connecting. It's all about connecting, about knowing people, about having resources. And I love to have resources for my clients so I can recommend them. I can recommend professionals to them. I can be a better service them by finding them resources.
How does the podcast now save you time or save energy or money, or any combination of those?
Well, it really allowed me to expand my business to the right target market. Before I was more based in the Pacific Northwest, and then I had some national clients. But now, because of my podcast, I'm able to go into markets all over the US and actually internationally. I have clients in Australia, and I have clients in the UK, and even in Vietnam. I had a client, and it really allows me to expand my reach and be able to service people all over the world. So it's basically recognition. Yeah.
Yeah. And is there any one thing that's been the biggest game changer for you, and any one thing, that you can kind of point to that we haven't mentioned so far?
I think that it is the ability to put content out in a very easy way. That was a game changer. It's increasing my being out there on LinkedIn, on other social media platforms, on creating content that then can be repurposed. But it's also creating those invaluable connections and reaching out to people that before I wouldn't reach out, but now I can help them. So I can reach out to them and say, hey, would you like to be a guest on my podcast? Or getting connected to people like, let's say, Bob Burg, the author of Go Giver. Yeah, it's a great book. And I listened to the book on Audible, and then I go, oh, I want to interview that person. I want to interview that author. I so connect to it. And then I connected to him. And of course, him, just like in the book, he's so nice, so giving that, of course, no problem. Yeah, I'll be a guest on your podcast. And then another person I know that I was just talking to today, I want to interview Bob Burg as well. So I'm going to make that connection, so you just create those connections all over that really benefit everyone.
That's great. As we wind down here, what would be the next step or next advice you'd give to someone listening to this who's been maybe noodling around thinking about the idea of doing a podcast for a while? What would you say to them?
So first of all, don't think, just do it. There is no way to know, you jump into the pool, otherwise you don't know if it's working or not. Don't overthink it. That will be my advice, number one. Number two is I'm a true believer of you have to work the system. If there is a system, you have to utilize it. Yes, you can sign up with Rise 25 and nothing will happen. And why will nothing happen? Is because you're not going to do anything. If you don't record episodes, it's not going to happen. But if you're willing to engage, and John, this is actually somebody interviewed me. I was on somebody else's podcast that was a guest on my podcast. And they asked me, do you take everyone as a client? I said, no. I really, first of all, I have to qualify, why do you want to do that? Why do you want to document your processes and procedures? How are you going to utilize it? And I almost have them convince me how they're going to use it, right? So you have to have your why of why you want to have a podcast. You have to have a goal in mind. Do you want to do it in order to meet people? Do you want to do it because it sounds cool? You have your own podcast. Is it because you want to be a thought leader in the industry? And that is all things that both you and Jeremy will help them define during the blueprint session. But my advice is commit to the process. Don't fight it. Go with it. Both John and Jeremy know exactly what they're doing, and they have a proven process that if you follow it, you are going to get results. They will help you define who are your best guests. They will even give you a script on how to talk to them. They will basically tell you, coach you how to approach it and how to do the interview. And the other advice I would give is follow the process for follow-up, because that is how you're going to get results. So you follow the process after you've done your podcast interview, then mention the people. I'm going to give here an acknowledgement to Mitchell Levy, that he used the term credibility dust. So you spread the credibility dust, right? You go, okay, I mentioned such and such on the podcast. And so you write them an email and say, I just mentioned you on the podcast. Here you go. Go ahead and send it out, on your social media. So you have to do all the follow-up actions, and that will assure your success. You just have to follow the process. And again, this is why I love working with you guys in Rise 25, is because you take the guessing out of it, how to create a successful podcast. You give the process, you give the step-by-step, you provide accountability. All you need to do is record your podcast, click record, talk to your guests, upload the episode, the recording, and then everything is being taken care of.
Adi, you've been so generous. I really appreciate it. We love working with you. You deserve heaps of credit for how much follow through you've done, actually following through with the process. No surprise there, given what you do. But it's been such a pleasure working with you. So thank you for taking the time. For those who maybe need some SOPs, need some processes in their business, where can they go to learn about you and also check out your podcast?
Yeah, so the podcast is the Systems Simplified Podcast, which you can find on any platform. And if they want to connect with me, I think the best thing is LinkedIn. It's Adi Klevit. So it's ADI and KLEVIT. And there's also my website, which is bizsuccesscg.com. So you have options.
Excellent. Thanks, Adi.
Thank you, John.
Thank you for listening to the Smart Business Revolution Podcast with John Corcoran. Find out more at smartbusinessrevolution.com. And while you're there, sign up for our email list and join the revolution. Revolution. And be listening for the next episode of the Smart Business Revolution Podcast.